Welcome to the Well Path podcast, where we sit down with experts and entrepreneurs across fitness, nutrition, mindfulness, and spirituality, offering you an inside peek at building a business and a life that is truly aligned. I'm your host, Brooke Robbins. Let's get into it. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Well Path podcast. This is actually the first episode of the second season. And for this episode, we're going to be diving into somewhat of a personal topic. And this was largely the reason why I was inspired to start the podcast in the first place. And the topic for today, we're going to cover my journey with disordered eating, but more importantly, advice and tips for anybody that might be struggling with any of the above: binge eating, disordered eating, restrictive eating, body dysmorphia, or any kind of complicated relationship with their body or with food. Now, this is extremely common among, I would say, specifically women in my generation, although I know that there are certainly men that experience this as well. And I think it's a topic that still relatively taboo and can be difficult to talk about. It can be very difficult to admit to ourselves when we are struggling in this way. I definitely relate to that, and it can be really complicated to actually ask for and start taking action towards getting help when you're in this situation. And we'll talk about some of the reasons, at least that I experienced that, or that I feel like I experienced that throughout this episode. So I'm going to give you guys just the cliff notes of sort of my experience with this, just to give you guys a bit of context and hopefully to make at least one person listening to this feel a little bit less alone. And then I'm going to talk about kind of some tactical, practical tips that if you are somebody who is struggling with this, and depending on where you are at in your journey, some of the things that you might be able to try as you work on healing your relationship to your body, to food, and really achieving food freedom. We're going to talk about that. So actually starting there, when I say food freedom, I am somebody who, and we'll get into the history of this, for a very long period of time, did not feel free around food. So I had an extremely restrictive diet, self-imposed for myself. I was afraid of a lot of food groups, carbs being a big one. And I had a very, tortured relationship, I would say, with food, and struggled with a lot of body dysmorphia. And now I am so grateful and feel so blessed to be in a position where I genuinely feel complete food freedom. I can eat whatever I want, and I don't feel stressed or anxious about it, which I share because there's a version of myself 5-6 years ago that if I heard myself saying this right now would be like, you're wrong. This is not the same person, because that will never happen for me. So I just want to preface by saying, if you're somebody who struggles a lot with eating, with eating specific foods, or with eating really at all, and you feel like it'll never get better, I'm here to promise you that it absolutely can and will, as soon as you prioritize it. And I just want to hold your hand through this process and tell you that everything is going to change the moment that you decide that you want it to. So come on this journey with me. Okay, so going into a bit of context, I think it's hard to pinpoint exactly when this starts for people, and that's definitely the case for me. I would say the sort of like counting calories and feeling like I needed to control what I eat and how I look probably started like late middle school, early high school. And I think there are so many factors, so it's hard to say exactly what causes this. But one thing that I want to share is that I do believe that a large component of this for many people is just this element of control. So while it may seem like this is really about food or about body dysmorphia, and there's usually an element of that, oftentimes with disordered eating and kind of, complicated relationships with food, it's just as much about feeling, perhaps subconsciously, we may not even be consciously aware of this, but feeling like something or some various things in our lives are out of our control. And food can become a sort of mechanism to feel like we are in control. Because if we are extremely controlling about what we eat, calories in, calories out, we feel like we have this sort of false sense of control. And that can be a coping mechanism when things are feeling out of control. So I want to get into the details, but just like many people, right? things definitely went on, within my family system, things that were happening that definitely were just fundamentally out of my control. And at the time, I wasn't conscious that these two things were related, but looking back, it's very clear to me that part of developing this hyperfixation with counting everything that I was eating and even counting, the calories that I was burning, which is like so hilarious to me now because none of these things are accurate anyway. But I genuinely used to be somebody who would track in my notes app everything that I ate and approximately how many calories were in everything that I ate. And I would go to the gym on the elliptical or on the treadmill and I would watch the calorie marker and I would like do math. Okay. It was like at that level of obsession. And I think for me as well, there was definitely like an element of body dysmorphia too, because again, looking back at old photos, it didn't look good. Okay. It did not look good. I was too skinny, right? Just wasn't attractive, but that's a whole nother sort of thing that comes into play. And I think sometimes when we are in this headspace and in this mindset for long enough, we can lose like objective sight. And it can be very challenging to see things clearly. So definitely for me throughout high school, this was a major issue. I would never admit that to a soul. So I want to be clear. I was not admitting to anybody any of this stuff. I was barely admitting to myself any of this stuff. And I was kind of in denial about it, even if there were people here and there that would sort of try to confront me about it. And this persisted pretty much all throughout college. By the time I got to college, it was already like at a point where I was quite obviously like really, really thin, like unhealthily thin, right? And I do remember the student health center trying to intervene, and that was really stressful in its own way. And I always denied it. Okay. So all throughout college, I was sort of like high functioning in my own way. So even though I was like clearly not healthy, I sort of had figured out a way to make it, quote, work for me. So I was like getting great grades and sort of on the surface, it looked like everything was going well. But underneath the surface, I was deeply disconnected to my body, deeply disconnected to myself. I was extremely anxious. And looking back and thinking back to, the way that I thought, the mindset that I was in, the actions that I took, it feels like when I replay those memories in my mind, I'm watching a movie about somebody else. Like I do not even recognize this person. And so it wasn't working for me, I guess is the point. But in my mind at that time, I thought it was. And I thought I looked great. So I was thinking, this is great. This is working for me. I had no interest in any intervention because I didn't think anything was wrong with me. For me, this was my normal. So I share all of that just because this may resonate with some people. If you're somebody who sort of has an inkling that you might have a problem, but haven't made it to the step of really fully admitting that this is a problem for you, I just want to also hold your hand and say, I completely understand you. And I have been in your shoes. And again, things can and will get so good. You don't even know how good things can be, but you have to like walk through some tough steps first. And we're going to get into that. So for me, all throughout college, I was pretty much in ignore mode. I never confronted this problem for myself. After college, so I was always sort of interested in like international travel, learning new languages. This has all since become a huge part of my life, as many of you guys know. And after college, I ended up doing a Fulbright grant in Taiwan. So I spent about a year in Taiwan, and that was a huge turning point for me with this because essentially it was like a totally new environment in terms of like exercise options that were available, food options that were available. And for the first time in my life, I struggled to fully control my intake and outtake. And over a relatively short period of time, a pattern of like restrictive eating kind of just transitioned into a pattern of binge eating because during the day, I would basically not eat anything because the food that was being offered to me was real food, right? Not food I could count. And I was terrified of that. So I wouldn't eat. Then I'd get starving at night and I would like binge on like oatmeal and like peanut butter, like random stuff that was in the pantry at the apartment where I stayed. And again, for anybody listening who may be struggling or may have struggled in the past with binge eating, especially if you're going through this right now. I also just want to say I see you. Like it's truly the worst feeling in the world because you feel kind of out of control. And oftentimes in the moment, we don't have the awareness of what it is that's like causing this or why we're even doing what we're doing. And again, it can lead you to feel even more disconnected from yourself, which is a really, really horrible feeling. But this was sort of the trend. So I'm sort of painting this picture like all throughout high school, college, immediately after college, I was essentially just disconnecting further and further away from my body, from my soul. I was kind of just like a shell of a human being, to be honest, even though on the surface, it looked like everything was going great. And I am embarrassed even to admit this, but it's true. And I'm going to be honest with you guys. Like, I never was motivated to seek help to fix this relationship that I have with my body and with food when it was making me skinny. I only felt motivated to make a change when it started to make me gain weight. And this was the binge eating. And so while experiencing that was like so painful on so many levels and something that caused me a lot of psychological pain, it's something I'm so infinitely grateful for because I don't know if I ever would have gotten to this point if I hadn't gone through that. So this is also a reminder, and I feel like this can apply to so many different things in life, but sometimes when something kind of seemingly bad happens to us or something happens that we think is objectively negative and is causing us a lot of pain, oftentimes there's a greater purpose for this that will become clear in time. And, a couple months or years down the line, you'll understand why you're going through what you're going through. It just might not make sense right now. So just stay positive and trust the process, I guess, is the message on that. Anyway, so I had this year in Taiwan. I wasn't really addressing this in Taiwan because I didn't really have the resources, but I ended up moving back to New York after this year, and a good friend of mine convinced me to try therapy. I had always been extremely reluctant, again, to try therapy or really any kind of intervention. But at this point, I was like, okay, now I'm miserable. So it's no longer working for me in my mind. So I'll try anything, right? When you get in those moments and you're like, I'll literally throw anything at this problem. So I was extremely lucky. I used some sort of online matching tool, got matched with a therapist, and it happened to be a home run for me on try number one. So I hit it off great with the first therapist I tried. I know this is not everybody's experience. We'll get into tactical sort of advice towards the end of the episode, but I was really lucky. I started working with a therapist, and I was seeing her regularly for several years. And this is where I want to get into sort of the tactical things that kind of worked for me that I want to share so that you guys have some actions that you can try and take with you. So for me, I would say there's like a couple of major components to healing this. The first one is emotional work, because again, even though on the surface, this might seem like an issue about your body and about food, it's usually not really about food. And it's usually not really about your body. It's usually about control and, in some senses, trying to numb ourselves from negative feelings. And these are often things that are not conscious. So for me, it wasn't like there was this obvious thing like, oh yeah, obviously it's about this. It took some time for me to work through and wade through the kind of complexities of, my family dynamics and my past and different experiences that I had had to understand where all of this was coming from. And it's different for everybody. So therapy is an amazing resource if that's accessible to you. I know that is not a financial possibility for everybody, and I completely understand that. So I think if you are not in a position right now to try therapy, I do think there are other things that you can do to start to have these conversations with yourself, including journaling through this element of control. So one really helpful question might be like, what is or was out of control in your life that might have left you feeling helpless or feeling, really out of control? And start to peel back the layers of what this is kind of really about for you. Another question specifically around binge eating, if that's something that you're struggling with, is like, what am I trying to numb with this? Because oftentimes I would find when I was in the moment, that's usually what it was. And it wasn't something I was necessarily conscious of, but like, what void are you trying to fill within yourself? Or what are you trying to numb with food right now is an interesting question. And I think again, therapy number one, I think this is like an incredible tool. You learn so much about yourself. It's really an investment that will just keep giving. And it's the best investment that you can make in yourself, in my opinion, especially for a period of time, right? Working through some sort of like, kind of like the core of, experiences that you've had in your past, your family dynamics, all the things that sort of make you who you are. And some of the subconscious programming that is running you. So that's one. Secondly, if therapy is not accessible to you, starting a consistent journaling practice. And again, if it is binge eating, journaling through those periods of time. So when you're feeling the urge to binge, picking up a pen and paper and writing it out. I also love this concept of morning pages from The Artist's Way, which is like just in the morning, first thing that you do, maybe you make a cup of coffee and you sit down and just sort of stream of consciousness. I think a lot of the times we have a lot of pent up energy and emotion that we don't necessarily give an opportunity to see the light of day. So that's number one. So number one is really emotional work. Number two is reconnecting to your body. So in my experience, the entire time that I was in this sort of push and pull with my relationship with my body, with food, I was extremely disconnected from my body, and coming home to my body was a huge part of healing this once and for all. So there are so many different ways that you can reconnect to your body. I will say I had been in, again, I would say I've always been into fitness, but I used to be into fitness for all the wrong reasons, which was, my workouts were very punitive on my body, if that makes sense. It was a lot of cardio, long runs. It was kind of all about disassociation. So I would kind of run to disassociate so I could let my mind be free. I would do really intense cardio or HIIT workouts and like, again, track my calorie burn as like making sure that everything was measuring up. And the result of that is you completely disconnect and disassociate from your body, which makes you feel not at home in your body, which makes you feel like you can't trust your body's cues. So I think number two, if number one is kind of this emotional work and number two is reconnecting to your body, is really about challenging yourself to embrace movement that genuinely feels good and that nurtures and nourishes your body and that encourages you to connect with your body. Also, yoga is a great example. So yoga used to drive me crazy. When I was in this period of time in my life, I could not be bothered to go to a yoga class, which makes so much sense to me now because I was almost like disgusted by my own body, to be honest. Like, I'm just being so real with you guys. And yoga is really a process of turning inward and really observing your body and being present with your body and with your breath. And I think it makes sense to me that at that period of time, it was not a form of exercise that I could really tolerate. Now I love yoga. I need yoga once a week. It's like it's one of the practices that really does bring me home to my body. And it's something that I cherish and that makes me feel amazing. So I think, again, leaning into movement that really feels good, that feels like you are healing your body and taking care of yourself and not punishing yourself is a huge thing. I'm a huge proponent of shorter, low impact workouts, strength and Pilates. You guys all know at this point, if anybody's following me on social media, that I'm obsessed with Form by Sammy Clark. I'll put a bunch of links in the show notes of sort of tactical things, and you guys can always DM me on Instagram if you have specific questions or want to talk through kind of specific things that you can try in terms of reconnecting with your body. But I think this is just pillar number two, is starting to actively try to reconnect to your body in a real way. Because again, especially when it comes to food, this is going to be really impactful to feel like you are connected to your body. You can trust your cues. It's going to allow you to actually embrace eating intuitively and getting rid of this calorie counting mentality and just embracing, you know what, I trust my body to tell me when it's hungry. And I trust myself to choose foods that are going to nourish my body. So that's number two. Number three, I would consider soul work. So we have sort of like emotional work, we have reconnecting to your body work, and then I would put soul work as number three. And again, there's so many different ways that you can go about this, but I really do believe that all of these sort of behaviors are a way for us to try to fill a void within ourselves that we may not be conscious of what that void is yet. But once you start doing this work, it'll become very clear. And I don't believe that there's any substitute for some sort of spiritual journey. And that's going to be different for everybody. You might call this different things. I'm not really that concerned with that. But having a connection and an open conversation with a higher power, whether you call that God, whether you call that the universe, whether it's universal consciousness for you, whatever it is for you, having a conversation with a higher power, knowing that the universe has your back, as sort of cliche as it sounds, but really digging deep with yourself and spending time with your actual soul. And this is something I'll probably go into more in a future episode, but for anybody that is a little bit familiar with meditation, you might be familiar with this concept of the thinker versus the observer. And I'll just paint the picture really quickly because it's an important part of, I think, grasping what I mean by soul work. So I'm going to share something that might come as a shock to some people, which is that you are not your thoughts. Okay. That sounds like kind of obvious in a way, but I think for a lot of us, we 100% identify with our thoughts. So we actually do believe consciously or subconsciously that we are our thoughts. Okay. This like voice in our head that's constantly going, and we all have that, right? We all have minds that are constantly going. You may not be aware enough to tune into what the voice is saying all the time. But if you spend just even a couple of hours observing, you'll notice there's a constant stream of consciousness inside of your mind. And the truth is that that is not actually you, okay? That's your thinking mind. Your soul is the thing behind that observes that. So in other words, if you spend an hour with the intention, like, I'm going to observe my thoughts, and you start to actually watch your stream of consciousness, you realize that something is watching the stream of consciousness, right? So if you can observe your thoughts, that necessarily means that you are not those thoughts. You are something else behind the thought that's there observing the thought. And that's your soul. So there are so many different tools to get in touch with your actual self. Meditation being one of them, and really tapping into this observer mentality and observing your thoughts for what they are and realizing that you are not your thoughts, spending more time in the present moment. This is like meditation. I've also found things like exploring your human design can be really interesting and illuminating in terms of just a way to think about and start to get clear on your own personal values, different aspects of who you are, right? And the way that you are and the way that you're built and your values and all of these things. So again, I think a lot of healing this for me has been a process of coming home to myself in terms of my body, in terms of making peace with things that might have happened in my life, right? It's kind of the emotional work. And then also coming home to my actual self, right? The self behind the thoughts, and feeling much more connected to myself, mind, body, and soul is like, that's really the thing. So again, there's no like pill you can take. It's not like a one quick fix, which might be disappointing to people, but this is like literally the most important journey that you'll ever go on in your life. And I think, again, if you are somebody who's struggling with this challenge is probably presenting itself for a reason, because in some ways it's your path back to yourself. And I can say that with complete honesty, like looking back, it makes complete sense to me that I had to go through this journey with my body, with food, with, my relationship to exercise, etc., because it has very much been my journey back to myself. So we have emotional work, we have reconnecting to your body, we have soul work. And then I want to talk about sort of food and our relationship to food. So this is the other component of it. For a lot of people, if you are somebody who has been pretty restrictive around food, this is like going to be probably the most challenging part. And again, my therapist was really helpful in walking me through this slowly, and it came definitely with time, but starting to really change your habits around food. So just like anything in life, right? Nothing's going to change if we don't change anything, right? So if we keep doing the same exact behaviors, we can't expect anything to change. You have to change your habits in order to change your life. So when it comes to food, if you're in, for example, a situation where, let's say you only eat once a day, maybe you skip breakfast, or maybe you only eat twice a day, you kind of like fast, for lack of a better term, in the first part of the day, I would encourage you to start eating 3 complete meals a day. Because again, especially if you're somebody who's dealing with any kind of binge eating situation, part of that is emotional, part of it is your body is starving by the end of the day. So shift it up. Try eating breakfast first thing in the morning, and then eating lunch, and then eating dinner, and seeing if you still even feel the urge to have anything, even a snack right after dinner. If you're filling yourself up during the day, you're likely not even going to have that urge. So and again, I really resonate. Like, I know if you are somebody who has a lot of food anxiety right now, that might not feel like a possibility. And it may be something that you have to ease into. But the only way that you are going to prove to yourself the truth, which is that eating 3 meals a day or eating pasta or, eating bread is not going to actually do anything, is by trying it and seeing what happens. So I do encourage you at a pace that feels comfortable for you, but push yourself a bit and, leverage your support system if you need to. If you have a partner, I would say if you have a partner, tell them that you're struggling with this. That's number one. My partner at the time was extremely supportive of me in this process, and I'm super grateful for that. I think I was really hesitant to talk about it with my partner at the time because it's something that holds a lot of shame, but that's another thing I would say. If you are somebody who's struggling with this and you are in a relationship, please let your partner in. Please tell them what's going on for you and tell them what's helpful, right? So for me, it was like, I needed this person to not comment on how much I was eating. And I needed this person to just like basically force me into situations sometimes. So like we went to Italy and I was like, I'm really nervous to eat pasta. Like I've never done this willingly before. So I'm really nervous, but like, please make sure I do. Like, don't let me order a salad, okay? When like we're in Italy, but also don't comment on how much I'm eating, right? Like I just needed certain things to ease my way in. So I would say if you have a partner, let them in. Otherwise, share with a couple of close friends or like close family members, people that can, again, hold your hand through this process. Because as insane as that might sound for somebody that doesn't struggle with this, it can really feel like so terrifying. And guys, I'm going to be so real with you. Like I literally cried after I ate pasta in Italy. Like it was so hard for me, but I did it. And like, that was a huge milestone that over time, now I laugh because like I love eating pasta. I eat pasta all the time. Like I can cook pasta for myself at home, which again, past version of myself would think that was impossible. So this is all just to say you can come such a far way with your journey with food in a relatively short time, but you have to start taking steps. Nothing is going to change unless you change something. So let people help you. Turn to your support system. You do not have to go through this alone, but just start, changing a couple of habits. Okay. Experiment. It's not a race. Sometimes we can get impatient, I know, but just trust that everything is going to get better. Like the second that you decide that you want to get better, that's literally the hardest part. Okay. So if you're listening to this and you're like, okay, I want to change this about myself, you have 125 million% the power to change this, and it will happen. Just by nature of you even making that decision, it's already happened. So this will happen. Be patient with yourself, but start making changes. So start making changes today. And as always, I'm here for you guys. So if anybody wants to chat, wants to dive into any aspect of the episode from today, please feel free to DM me on Instagram at Brooke Chapin Robbins or on the podcast account. I will see you next week and have an amazing rest of your week.